Well, hello, friends. Good to be with you today. Pastor Landry, Point of Life Community Church in Placerville, Louisiana, sharing with you our weekly Bible study. Now, we are continuing our lessons today in Exodus, but we're also bringing in a chapter from the book of Leviticus because today this study is a kind of a special study. It's it's a study that deals with the aspect of human life and the protection of human life. That's the title of our lesson is protection there. And so God expects His people to protect the vulnerable, and of course, that begins with the unborn. This third Sunday in January is the Sanctity of Human Life Sunday. We celebrate that in our churches and throughout the nation. There, Ronald Reagan, I think, began that and 40 years ago, and so it's an important time for us to pause and to remember the unborn and to remember the fatherless, the orphans, the widows there, and the needy in our communities, and to do what we can to help them there. You know, when we're born, when a baby is born, we wait for them to say their first words, and we love to hear them say "mama" and "dada" there. But there are other words that eventually come out of their mouth. And usually the first one is no. Oh, I've heard many children, just say that word that little ones say. Or mine. Yeah, yeah. So as you think about these last two words, that you realize, that somehow, we have to teach our children, to not be selfish there, and we have to teach them to share. And so that's kind of a challenge sometimes there, and unfortunately, some parents will not discipline their children there, and they will go on with that attitude of no, say no to anything they want to say no to, and or say mine, it's mine, it belongs to me. So that's a problem. But in Exodus chapter 22 and Leviticus chapter 19, we'll be looking at verses 21 through 27 in Exodus 22 and Leviticus 19 verses 9 to 10. But I want to encourage you though to take a few minutes and read the entire scripture that's given to us, because Exodus 22 1 through 27, the chapter there, and then and Leviticus 19. Both of these are very important chapters, very important aspects of our study. You see, God gave to Moses the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, and He also gave Moses some extensive instructions about how to apply the Ten Commandments. We talked a little bit about that last time there, and he gave the Ten Commandments there to kind of make sure that everybody lived life fairly and good, and had a good life, and weren't taken advantage of. And so we have our relationship with one another in those last six commandments, and then the first four commandments we have our relationship with God. And so that's important. Now, when you look at Exodus, at our scripture passages that deal with our study here today, we're looking at Exodus 22 and verse. Excuse me, get it right here, and in Leviticus chapter 19. So when you look at that, but when you look at this book of Exodus, and you're reading through it there, our study really starts with chapter 20, and goes on through chapter to the end of chapter 19, and goes into chapter 20. Excuse me, Exodus 20 there, and into chapter 22. So as we look at that, though, you want to realize that Exodus 20, excuse me, through chapter 23, there, verse 19, that contain instructions, compiled in the covenant scroll. And so this is what these chapters cover there, and And when you look at the second block in Leviticus chapter 17 through 26, there theologians have called this the holiness code, and it repeatedly calls God's people to live holy lives. And so we'll look at this in chapter 19 briefly in a little bit there, but both of these begin with instructions about worshiping God there, and from there, each presents laws about how God's people were to interact with other people. And so this is all interconnected. And as we think about that, we realize, and we'll see that as we look at the lesson there. But we can't separate our relationship with God from how we treat people. We say we're a child of God. Well, that makes a difference in how we treat other people, how we act towards them, and how we do what we can do to help them. You think today, in these days, the people of California have lost thousands of homes, and 20 plus lives have been lost, and so people are reacting today to the great needs that are there and doing something. I was watching the news earlier, and some of the things that people are doing to help there as well. And I saw Jay Leno on one of the little videos that I saw in the newscast earlier there, fixing food and preparing meals and serving those meals and helping the needy out there in California. So lots of things are going on, and so we need to care for one another. We need to realize that each person's life is important to God, and we can't separate ourselves from saying I'm a child of God and I'm a fellow human being. You have to put that together and realize that what God expects of us is God expects us to respect life, to respect the lives of others there. And sometimes we may not agree with these people in their lifestyles or whatever, but God still calls us to be respectful of life and do what we can to help persons there. So all of life reflects a person's relationship with God. And so how you live your life shows whether or not you have that relationship with God there. And if you're living your life in a way that honors God, and people see that, people know that. And if you call yourself a Christian, then you live like a Christian, should live there. And so we think about that. Now, one of the key thoughts and the key ideas comes to us from Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 1, where it says, "Be holy, for I am holy." So God expects us to be like Him. Oh, that can be perfect. And we know that, but God does expect us to relate to other people as He relates to them, loving and caring about them there as well. So in chapter 22 of Exodus, we'll look at 21 verses 21 to 27, and there, this section is broken up into two. These verses here are broken up into two sections. The first one deals with exploitation. So God gives some specific instructions about how to care for other people there. And so here, verse 22, Exodus chapter 22, verse 21 begins with this. It says, "You must not exploit a resident alien or oppress him, since you were resident aliens in the land of Egypt." God is clear and specific about telling the Hebrew people and telling us as well, reminding them that they were resident aliens. Means that they were not of that country, but they lived there in that country. And in the same way, the Israelites would have people coming and live in their country there. And so they were not to exploit them. Meaning that they couldn't take advantage of them. Exploit means to do others wrong or even to treat them violently, and the word oppress there as well means to do others wrong. Oppress means to squeeze or crush someone, and so these two words together show us some actions that inflict pressure and hurt on someone, and those ones particularly here that I mentioned are the resident aliens, the ones who have come to their country and who live there and whatever. And we have that as well in America, resident aliens, people who have come to work here or come, trying to get a better life here, immigrants and such as that. And so we do our best we can to care for our fellow man in our land. And then he talks about the widow and the orphan. All right, you must not mistreat the widow, any widow or fatherless child. So God was very clear about the words that the language that He uses here in verse 22. There, as He speaks about the widow and the orphan child, there, these would depend on charity for their survival. And so God calls His people to be sure, to be aware of their needs, and to do what we can to help them there with their needs. You see, when a woman became a widow there in Israel, she could not inherit her husband's property if it was just her, and her husband, and the property went back to family, and she was out, and so she was homeless there, and she would have to seek employment. Or return to her parents' home there, or depend on the generosity of others, or else if she could remarry. But that was something different there as well. But her and the orphan there would be those who needed to be cared for. I became an orphan at 15, if you want to call that. My father died when I was about 1.5. My mom died when I was 15. I had family. I'm the last of 14 children, so I wasn't out homeless or whatever. But at that period of time, I had to depend on family to take me in and to take care of me. First family was one of my sisters there in Pierreport, where I lived. They're not too far from where we lived. I lived with her a few months there. And then I decided to make a move to one of my other sisters who lived in Baton Rouge and finished growing up there. And so both of these homes were great to me. They cared for me. They loved me, and I appreciate, as I look back now, I appreciate, what they did for me during that stage and that time in my life. And so I can imagine, orphans today, and orphans in that day and time. They were in a predicament there. So what does Exodus 22:23 says? So if you do mistreat them, God said, now listen to this. Said, if you do mistreat them, they will no doubt cry to me, and I will certainly hear their cry. Wow. God is aware. Well, that reminds us, these people that He's talking to have just come out of Egypt not too long ago, and they were crying out to God. They were in misery. They were the resident aliens who had been enslaved by the Egyptians for 400 years, and so they'd been there a long time, and they had pretty much lost any kind of feeling of or idea of leaving or getting out of there. They were slaves, but they began to cry out to God. God heard their cry, and God, of course, raised up a deliverer for them. That would be Moses, and eventually God would raise up a deliverer for all of us through His people there. And you look back at the Abrahamic covenant, you see the promise there of a deliverer, and you go on through there the Old Testament, and you see that in Isaiah. You see that there God speaking again and again there, and eventually His Son would be born. We see that in the Gospels, in the New Testament, and so we have our deliverer, one who delivers us from sin, the one who gives us a new life. But God says there, if you mistreat them, they will no doubt cry out, and I will hear them. So God doesn't ignore the cries of the needy. He did it for Israel when they were in bondage. He's going to do it for individuals who cry out to Him there in their time of need. And if you are mistreating them, listen what happens here. Okay, so basically, though, God is speaking to the nation, not just the individuals, but to the nation as a whole. So if the nation saw someone being mistreated, if the nation talking about people in the national group that saw and realized that there was something going on, then they had to act and deal with that individual who was mistreating. And if they didn't, then listen to what would happen. My anger will burn, and I will kill you with the sword. Now, don't take that literally, God coming down with a sword and kill, but he means that an army would invade their land, and when you look at Israel, yeah, armies invaded their land. Then some of that was judgment from God for their lifestyle, for the way they were, and for how they were treating other people as well. And so God says, "I will kill you with the sword." And then notice what happens. Then your wives and will be widows, and your children will be fatherless. Wow. See, women outlive men during this period of time in Israel. Now, why? Because men went off to war, and a lot of them were killed in battles and such as that. Then, so the the widows were left, the fatherless, the children were there, and so somebody had to care for them. Somebody had to help them there. So God very clearly says, do not exploit the widows, fatherless child, or the alien resident there in your land there. And then in verses 25 to 27 there of Exodus 22, there it says to us there, or it speaks to us about lending practices. All right, so there were no banks, and no money exchanges and things that we have today there, where you can get a loan for a certain interest and you know what you're going to pay back and all of that. And some of these, if you're not careful, you go to one of these lenders there that's not a bank, and their interest rates are exorbitant, or even if you use a credit card, if you're not careful there, the credit cards I have today, I've learned that, hey, I've got to pay them off at the first of the month there, and if I don't, then interest accrues, and it's not just a 3 or 4, 5%. It's 25, 20 to 29, 30% interest there. So I make sure that I pay these off, and so, but back then there wasn't nothing like this. So it speaks of lending practices. Our next section here, verses 22 to 25, and notice how these people were to treat their own people. All right, and so basically, there were difference in how they could lend to their people, and if they made loans to other people, then they could charge them interest, but not their people. Listen to this: if you lend silver to my people, to the poor person among you, you must not be like a creditor to him. You must not charge him interest. Wow. Now, God was very clear, very plain. So yes, you could loan to your neighbor and expect that they would pay you back. You set a time or whatever there, and if these were poor, that maybe they could work it out or whatever for you there, whatever their needs were. And so you did what you could in helping your fellow man, your neighbor there, and so they were to care about them, but provide loans, but no interest could be charged on these loans. Now, verse 26 says, if you ever take your neighbor's cloak as collateral. Now, okay, so you could collect collateral, okay, if and the banks do that today. Well, what's your collateral? You want to make a big loan? Well, I have a home, I have a car, I have this, I have that, and you could put that as collateral. And if you don't pay that loan, guess what? They say it's ours. So make sure you're able to pay that loan. But here's what God says. Now listen to this. If you ever take your neighbor's cloak as collateral, now listen to this. He's talking about poor people here, all right? Return it to him before sunset. Why? Well, God clearly says in verse 27, for it is his only covering. It is the clothing for his body that he will, what will he sleep in? And if he cries out to me, I will listen, because I am gracious. Again, God says, hey, I'm going to hear, I'm going to listen, I'm going to know, what you've done to that individual. So if you take his cloak or whatever, during the day, and as collateral, you can hold it during the day as collateral. Each morning, he's bringing it back to you. But at nighttime, that person had to have that cloak to sleep in, to cover, or else, I mean, that was his main covering. And uh, you know, it's not like today. We put on clothes in the morning. In the morning, we get dressed. We go about our business for the day, and at night we take a bath and we put on our pajamas or whatever we're going to wear, our nightwear there, and then we get up in the morning. And we've got extra clothes. Well, not everybody, realize, and certainly back in that day and time. Then so they were to give back the cloak that had collected as collateral, so that the person would not be sleeping in the cold that night and without his cloak there, and that was important. So return it to him before sunset. Okay, so before the sun goes down, you make sure he gets that cloak back there, and God very plainly says, for it's his only covering. That's all he has. And that was typical in that day and time for the poor. They didn't have a closet full of clothes. I can go to my closet and get anything I want to wear that day, and I don't have to worry about. Let's see, I only got this on. No, 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 oh, no. I got a whole closet full, and you probably do too. Not everybody has as much, but still at all. And so here we see here where God says, don't charge interest, here, and don't take advantage of him. Don't be like the creditors to him there, and don't take his cloak as collateral without returning it to him at nighttime. And so the destitute person, had only one weapon in his arsenal, and that was to cry out to God. And God says, I will hear. For I am a gracious God, he says there, as we see at the end of that verse there. He says, excuse me, he says there, uh, uh, he says, for it is his covering, it is the clothing for his body. What will he sleep in? If he cries out to me, I will listen. He says, because I am gracious. What does the word grace means? Means undeserved merit, and so we're saved by grace there, and God responds graciously there to the poor, to the needy, there to those who are being taken advantage of, and God made sure that his people understood, what they were to do in helping others there. So now, when we come to Leviticus 19, now we'll look at verses 9 and 10, reaping crops. And so here's how the farmers were to relate to the poor people there in the community as well. And this was important. This was significant there, because the poor people, many times, even if they worked, they would use whatever money they had at the end of the day that they were paid that day. Excuse me, to provide for their family, and that was it. And if they didn't work, then they didn't have anything to to buy food for the family for that day, and so it was pretty tough times there, and there were times of prosperity by all means, but a lot of times it was very tough times, and so here in Leviticus 19 verses 9 and 10, it deals with the subject of reaping crops. All right. So when you reap the harvest of your land, so when you're going out to your fields, you're going to reap your harvest. You are not to reap to the very edge of your field or gather gleanings of your harvest. Well, do you understand what that means? In other words, you were to leave some for the poor so that they could go in there. So, like on the edges of your field, you left that there. And if you were gleaning there, and some fell on the ground, you left that because poor people would come behind you. You remember the story of Ruth there, and then she and her mother-in-law Naomi came back there to Israel from a foreign land, and there they were, poor, destitute. There they had their home, but they didn't have much of anything else, and so her mother-in-law sent her out to gather the gleanings there. And so that she went, and when Boaz saw her, he realized that she was who she was, and uh, uh, told his workers there to be sure to leave her alone, not to mess with her, and let her pick anything that she wanted there, and even if it was from the main crop there, she could pick. So he saw something there, but he was a kind of individual, who knew these rules here, who knew these laws that God had given. So you're not to reap to the very edge of the field or gather gleanings of your harvest, and so they were to leave some for the needy. All right. And then notice what it says in verse 10. Do not strip your vineyard bare or gather its fallen grapes. Wow. So always to leave some there for the poor and the resident alien. And then notice here, he says at the end of verse 10 here, Leviticus 19:10 says, I am the Lord your God. Now, if you read all of Leviticus 19, you're gonna see over and over again God speaking to them. I am your God, and so they were to follow God's rules, God's directions, and so these two chapters, in Leviticus 19 and Exodus 22, are important chapters as we think about the sanctity of human life. We think about the needy. We think about others, who are not as fortunate as we. I think of myself as blessed abundantly by my Lord and my God. Now, I have never gone hungry except that maybe I've been fasting or something. I've never wondered where my next meal was coming from. I never wondered, what I was going to wear, when I get up that morning there. I always had those things. God always provided, and we've been blessed, in that way. But I realize that others are not as fortunate. And how many times as a pastor I've been called on by poor, needy people who have things happening in their life that they have no control over there. Like in this wintertime weather there, I've helped a family there with broken pipes. The pipes were frozen, and I didn't do the work, but I helped them with some funds there to fix that. And so we see our neighbors, we see the needy, and we do what we can. And this is what God expects of us, to care about others, to realize that others are not as fortunate as we. And when we have the ability, not again, sometimes we kind of have to scrimp on what we have. We just go from day to day or week to week, and we pay our bills and we take care of our own personal needs there. And we have very little sometimes to spare. But if we have to spare, if we have something, then we need to help the needy. We need to be generous. We need to be kind. We need to be loving, because God says, I am a gracious God. I have given to you what, if you're a born again Christian, what you didn't deserve. Why? Because the Bible says, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And so, as sinners, we certainly didn't deserve God's grace, but He gave it to us anyway. He gave it to us so that we might enjoy the best of life. And so, in knowing Him and knowing that, this scripture here that's quoted in Leviticus 19:10, I am the Lord your God. Knowing that, knowing Him, then our lives are different, and in turn, we need to be different also in caring for our fellow man and doing what we can to help our neighbors there in their time of need as well. So, several things that we need to note here in this lesson. One is that we realize that as Christians, and the kind of Christian we're to be here, all Christians are under obligation to seek to make the will of Christ supreme in our lives. So what is God's will for my life? That's what I ought to focus on. What is God's will? What does God want to do in my life? And God's will in human society. What does God want to do in others' lives? And how does God want to use me in helping others there as well? So means and methods used for the improvement of society and the establishment of righteousness among men can be truly and permanently helpful only when they are rooted in the regeneration of the individual by the saving grace of God in Jesus Christ. So God uses us as believers, to help others there. And so believers are to care for the vulnerable people, the widows and the orphans and the resident aliens there. And listen to this one. Believers are to offer dignity to those in need. So you don't help them with a smirk on your face. You help them with a smile on your face and a smile on your heart, knowing that you're doing God's will, as you care for others, for the needy, as you care for the widows, the orphans, as you care for someone, or as you encourage someone in carrying that precious baby to birth and to life. Then, so there are lots of ways that we can, lots of things that we can do there. And then believers are to physically help those in need. When we can, do what we can, or else provide the funds needed for what needs to be done, or some way, helping them in some way. That's important, and that's what God expects of us. So think about your life. Think about your perspective as a believer in Christ. Is your life different than what the world is? The world says, I don't care about those people. I'm only about, no, we're believers. We've been changed. And so we care about others. We care about the needy. We care about those who are destitute. And we care about that young woman who is about to become a mother, or will eventually become a mother one day. They're encouraging her to carry that child, to birth. And for that child to be a blessing, because that child is made in the image of God. And from that moment of conception to those 9 months, or however long her gestation period is there, how long that time is there until birth and throughout life, that person's life is special because they are made in the image of God from the very beginning. That little tiny seed that's sown there in that young woman's life, and God will make something special of that child, of that individual. And so we must keep that in mind. So, my friends, think about others as you live your life. Realize that their lives are special in the eyes of God. And God hears their cry. He heard it for the children of Israel in bondage, and he told them that he would hear the cry of those who cry out to them in that day and time, and that they would be held accountable if they did not respond to the needs of others. Father, I thank you today that you have blessed me. Lord, I look at my life and I think, wow, I am blessed, Lord. I've never been hungry, Lord. I've never been without clothing. I've never, I've just had so much, Lord, in life. And Lord, I'm not rich in this world's goods, but I'm rich, Lord, in your grace and your goodness and your provision. I thank you for that, Lord. And I pray that what you give me, Lord, can be used for your glory, for your according to your will, to help others, Lord, when the opportunities come and when I am able to do that. Thank you for that, Lord. Thank you for your blessings and for your goodness. Bless your word, Lord, as you speak to our hearts. We thank you and we praise you, Father, in Jesus' precious name. Amen. My friends, Pastor Landry, Point of Life Community Church in Plocherville, Louisiana, saying goodbye to you, and we look forward to seeing you next week as we continue our study here in Exodus there, and we'll be looking at Exodus 25 to 31 next week, and that one's more about instructions. And so God had to give his people a lot of instructions, and we need instructions too as believers. And so we'll look at that and think about that next week. God bless you. We'll see you. We'll see you then.